This is just a quick lesson on form and spacing in poetry, especially with line breaks, and how the shape of a poem can affect the way it's read by the reader. For this example, what I'm going to do is take a famous poem by Stanley Kunitz called The Portrait, and I'm going to show you the original version, and I'm going to basically screw it up and move all the formatting in different ways and show how that changes the way the poem is read, even though all the language is absolutely the same. So once again, this is the poem as it was originally written. My mother never forgave my father for killing himself, especially at such an awkward time and in a public park, that spring when I was waiting to be born. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with a pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown, level eyes, she ripped it into shreds without a single word and slapped me hard. In my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning. All right, so this poem probably has one of the most famous endings of any poem I've ever heard. So I've heard this poem a lot. And one thing you notice is the way the line breaks work here. It ends with the image of him feeling his cheek burning, right? So let's compare this to a few other versions where I basically just take out all the line breaks and just screw them up, even though I keep all the language the same. So once again, same language, but now I put this into couplets except for that last line which stands alone. Listen to how just moving the line breaks around really changes the energy of the poem. My mother never forgave my father for killing himself, especially at such an awkward time and in a public park, that spring when I was waiting to be born. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with a pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown level eyes, she ripped it into shreds without a single word and slapped me hard. In my 64th year, I could feel my cheek still burning. All right, so basically, whenever you're trying to decide the format that you want a poem to take, it's basically a risk-benefit analysis. So with couplets, you tend to get a little bit more energy, but then you have to decide where you're going to break the lines. So compare this to the original. Compare the first line, for example. In this non-Kunitz version, my mother never forgave my father for killing himself is the first line. Okay, in the original version, you have my mother never forgave my father. Okay, so in the original version, you get to the end of the word father and you're like, never forgave him for what? You don't really know. So you get a little bit of suspense as your brain and your imagination have to fill in the gaps before you move your brain, or before you move your eyes to the next line and read for killing himself, right? So in the first version, you're building energy with that question. You're not really sure why his mom never forgave his father. In the second version, okay, oops. In the second version, you're giving away that secret right away. There is no suspense built in that first line. You get the answer right away. So instead, you're trading suspense for shock value, right? And then a few other examples. It would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping when I came down from the attic. Okay, so the way this line is structured, it gives the impression that he heard him thumping when he came down from the attic, right? As opposed to here, would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping when I came down from the attic. You kind of get that implication, but it's not quite as strong. And then the way it ends, in my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning, as opposed to this version, whoops, and slapped me hard in my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning. This kind of goes a little bit faster to the realization that the narrator is 64 years old, right? So this happened as a kid, but then 64 years old, and it creates a little bit of confusion. Like, well, did this actually happen when you're 64, or are you reliving it? So it changes the energy a little bit. And then the last line, I can feel my cheek still burning, as opposed to, I can feel my cheek still burning. So in the original, I can feel my cheek line break. So you have about an eighth of a second before your eyes move down here and fill in the gap, right? As opposed to this one, which again is sacrificing suspense for maybe shock value, right? So I can feel my cheek still burning. You get all of it at once. All right, and in this third version, and once again, this is not the one Stanley wrote. This time, basically, I moved things around, did some weird indents, and just kind of played with all the spacing. So once again, exact same language, no changes there, but just where the words appear. So my mother never forgave my father for killing himself, especially at such an awkward time in the public park that spring when I was waiting to be born. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with a pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown, level eyes, she ripped it into shreds without a single word and slapped me hard. In my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning. Right, so hopefully by now you're starting to notice how, even though all the language is the same, just moving the line breaks around creates, in my opinion, kind of a totally different poem. For example, this line here, I was waiting. If this is indented and isolated, I was waiting for what? I was waiting for forgiveness. I was waiting for my father. I was waiting for my mother. I was waiting for my parents to get along. I was waiting for fortune. I was waiting for true love. I was waiting for what? Oh, I was waiting to be born. Right? So you get a little bit of suspense and some double meaning there. And then she locked his name in her what? All right. Oh, in deepest cabinet and would not let him out. And you see how this let him out is emphasized a little bit more. So is that like a direction to the reader that if you are in a similar situation, you should let someone go, or what is it? You know. So even though language is the same, pretty different than how the original version looks. Right? Now, the final version. Oops. This is just basically a prose poem version with all the line breaks taken out completely. So, my mother never forgave my father for killing himself, especially at such an awkward time and in a public park that spring when I was waiting to be born. She locked his name in her deepest cabinet and would not let him out, though I could hear him thumping. When I came down from the attic with a pastel portrait in my hand of a long-lipped stranger with a brave mustache and deep brown level eyes, she ripped it into shreds without a single word and slapped me hard. In my 64th year, I can feel my cheek still burning. Right, you notice how I read that a lot faster? Whenever you have something formatted as a prose poem, it's pretty certain that the reader is going to read it more quickly because they don't have line breaks to make them pause for an eighth of a second. So in that case, you're sacrificing all the energy you would get from double meanings, suspense, all that stuff. Instead, all you're getting is just the energy of rushing through it on the page. Right? So that energy from a prose poem version, once again, for the 6,000th time, very different than what you see in the original version. So if you ask me which is the best version, of course I'm going to say the original by far. My point is just to point out that when you tinker with what the last word that the reader sees on each line, right? These words stick in the reader's mind an eighth of a second longer. So she locked his name is a name. So you think name, name, name. You get to the next line. In her deepest cabinet, 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 cabinet. It would not let him out. Right? See how that works? So one thing you can think about, once you have the language of the poem the way you want it, try changing the format. Make it a prose poem. Give it couplets. Give it long lines. Make it a long, skinny poem. Just move it all over the place and kind of see where the energy is coming from. You'll very quickly realize the energy comes from very, very different methods in different places, depending on how the poem looks on the page, even if the language is the same. In terms of which one is right, which one is wrong, that's totally up to you. Once again, I love this original version, and I basically screwed it up for these other versions just to make a point, not because I think they're better. I would still say to my last dying breath that the first version is the right version, the one that the author actually wrote. But I think this is a pretty good illustration of what happens when you move things all over the page Do you want to have weird indents like this, or do you want to have it more of a boxy poem? Do you want to have couplets, long lines, whatever you want. So totally up to you because you're the author. I hope that's helpful. Take care.